So it's time for another week of composting questions to be answered by Dr. Compost. And so I was looking online to see there's a number of questions that came up this week. For those of you in North America, of course, you're coming into winter now. And so a lot of questions have to do with making sure the worms are happy in the coming cold weather. And so there's one question from Texas. And this is a person who has been keeping their worms successfully happy in summer with freezing the food scraps, which is a great idea. And one of the things about keeping the environment good for the worms in different seasons is the worms can choose how far or close they come to the source of either cold or hot. So for example, when you freeze the food scraps, they can choose how close they come to the food as it's thawing out. And likewise, this person was wondering if they warmed up their food scraps, would that be this sort of a similar benefit in colder months? And yes, that's certainly a possibility. He won't last as long given the nature of the way it's going to be. You want to stir the food in as you add it when it's warm. So probably the seed mat is really this person also had a seed mat. It's probably the best way to go. The two things I really recommend for cold weather are adding a cold frame on top or a seed germination mat. Those are good options. We have Brian and Aaron here, and so I always like to give priority to the people that are coming to live to the session. So if either of you guys have questions, Aaron, if you turn on your audio, I think you might be the person that had the yellow jacket problem. Anyway, that's another interesting question we'll get into when I finish describing what to do in the cold. So the principles you're looking for are basically insulating the subpod when the weather's cold, and that's meaning putting plenty of mulch on the soil around the subpod to keep the cold from coming in from the sides. And then you could even think about putting a bit of insulation on the lid itself. So especially if your subpod is open to the night sky, you lose a lot of heat through a cloudless sky at night. So if you had a bit of insulation you could tape to the top of the lid, that would help. And then even putting straw inside the chamber between the worm blanket and the top lid, that'll also help. So one interesting technique people have used is they'll take an egg carton or a couple of egg cartons, and they'll basically create kind of a trapped air kind of surface inside. So you can have your worm blanket put on the egg cartons, put cardboard on top of that, put straw on top of that, and then you're creating more insulation. Because within the subpod chamber, when the food's breaking down, the worms are active, they'll be consuming the food and actually creating the heat, even in the wintertime. So as long as you insulate it well, you should be protecting that heat from getting lost and keeping the worms in a good environment. So another question that came up this week was yellow jackets getting into the subpod. So that's obviously a bit of a fraught situation. You don't want to be getting stung by yellow jackets when you're trying to clear them out. So what I'd recommended for that was, this is kind of a special situation where I think it's probably helpful to use sprays. I've used them on my property before when you're dealing with stinging insects. And so my advice was wait until dusk, get a Hornet yellow jacket spray and open the subpod. And this is where you want to be bundled up and either have safety glasses or possibly a visor to protect yourself. But by waiting till dusk, the insects will be moving slowly. And then just as you open it, spray to knock down any flying yellow jackets, and then wait until there's no more movement. You might have to respray a few times, and then let the fumes dissipate, and then go ahead and use your aerator to mix the food scraps in. It should be okay. The active agents in the sprays for insects at the concentration you're using them in the spray should be okay for the bedding. And what you're wanting to do is, of course, get those food scraps mixed in thoroughly to prevent this problem from happening again. And the other thing to keep in mind is yellow jackets are only likely to get into the subpod if the soil level has receded around the subpod such that the wormholes are getting exposed and they can fly in and start to colonize that way, or if the lid isn't closing properly. So pay attention to any gaps in the lid that you have to you either if you have the mini, of course, latch the lid. If you have the classic, make sure that it's closing fully every time, and that should keep most of the winged insects out of the subpod. And then of course, you want to be stirring the food scraps into the bedding to sort of reduce the amount of attracting material that's on the surface that would tend to bring in the decomposters that you're trying to keep out that are noxious like yellow jackets. So that's two main questions that had come up. Yeah, another question that I'd seen in an earlier post. Just one second here. Leanne's just joining us. So any of the three of you, if you would like to ask questions since you're you have my attention, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away, because it's always great to be able to have the back and forth and get more clarity on everyone's particular situation, because I can get some general idea of things from a distance, but oh yeah, go ahead, Erin, you're raising your hand. Go ahead. Ask away.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks. I have a few issues that we're trying to address. We're in South Texas, and the soil is it's mostly clay.
Okay.
So what we tried to do was we got one of the raised beds and put the mini in it. But we're still having trouble, and we dug down actually about 3 feet, tried to get all that clay out just so that there was plenty of soil. I'm not sure if we're using the right soil, because we're having trouble either with too much moisture or too little. So it's been very hard to balance. And of course, our worms have disappeared for the moment. So do you have suggestions?
I do. So oftentimes it's a balancing act for soils. There's the physical components of the soil and there's the biological components, and you want both of them to work together. And so the physical components are the proportion of clay and sand and what I'd call loam mixed together. So if you had 30% sand and 30% clay, and then the rest was a loam material, then that would be ideal. And it's unusual to, if you're lucky enough to be in a part of the world where you have that naturally, that's great. But for the rest of us, you typically want to create something that approximates that. And what you're looking for is something that the water can move through easily, but doesn't just leave the soil behind. And so oftentimes you'll find potting mixes are an easy first choice. What's the size of the bed that you're trying to fill with soil?
So it's just one of the, we got it from some subpod, the raised bed. It's supposed to be for the classic. We started with one mini, and now we have 2 minis in there. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. With 2 minis in there, I think that might be your very best bet is to, do you have like a Home Depot near you or some kind of large landscaping?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're looking for a medium really that has plenty of organic matter. That's pretty good at holding moisture, and then but allowing things to drain well, and then providing the sort of the food for the bacteria and microbes that will start to create a structure in that soil that's ideal for for holding water. So what's the soil you have in there at the moment?
So this is the second time we've dug into it and put, so we started with a mix of compost and just like topsoil. Uh,
Okay.
we dug it out. We actually put some pea gravel about 3 feet below,
Hmm.
and then filled that with mostly a compost that has quite a bit of like wood chips and things of
Okay.
that nature in it.
Hmm.
But this
Hmm.
time, most recently, it was a raised bed soil and a
Hmm.
compost mixture.
Okay.
Does
And
that?
how would you describe what's happening with the water now when you pour water into that soil?
So it seems to, it's, it looks moist on the top, and we have
Hmm.
the, moisture meters and stuff, but when you go down a ways, it's dry. So it's
Okay.
trying to find, I can't find the balance. I just don't know.
Yes. Well, what you could consider doing is buying some straight vermiculite. So vermiculite is kind of an expanded volcanic mineral that you should be able to buy bags of vermiculite at a landscaping gardening store, or even maybe Home Depot would have it as well. I like to do a combination of perlite and vermiculite because although they're both expanded from volcanic minerals, they each play slightly different roles. So the perlite, which is white, tends to be really good about bringing air down into the soil, and the vermiculite tends to act like a sponge. And so putting both of those, you can amend a soil that's a bit problematic and give it better properties. So you could consider maybe carefully taking that top layer off and setting it aside, maybe in a bucket or a bin, and then into the soil below, go ahead and put in a generous amount of the vermiculite, like say up to 20% roughly of that as vermiculite, and that'll tend to hold the moisture better and release it slowly to the surrounding area, and then put your soil back on top of that. Um, and then in addition, if you added the perlite, so if the total was maybe a combination of 30%, say 15% vermiculite, 15% perlite, you'll achieve a really nice balance of bringing in moisture, but also allowing air to get in. And those are the conditions that really favor getting a really good bacterial activity. And the reason that's interesting is because the subpot itself is generating a lot of soil microbial activity, that can then start to move out into the garden bed, and you'll notice the plants will start to do really well with that. So how does
Oh,
that sound as a solution?
that's great. And they do have those products at my local store. So thanks.
Great, great. Um, and then so the worms left, you say. One thing I've been advising people is one of their very favorite foods is manures, cow and horse in particular. Stirring that in tends to bring them running because in a way that's pre-digested food that's stocked full of microbes, and they eat the microbes as well. So it tends to be something that really draws them, and it's good for the soil as well. So if you had a source of fairly fresh cow or animal manures, other than chicken's a bit sort of intense with the nitrogen. So if you had that'll tend to bring back any worms that are in the vicinity.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Hmm. You're welcome. We've just had somebody new joining us, another Brian Schwartz. Did you have a question for us, Brian, or anyone else here?
Yes, I just
Brian.
joined on my phone instead of
Okay.
the computer. So I was gonna go outside, and I have a couple mushrooms growing that just started in there.
Uh-huh. That's not a
Let me,
bad thing,
yeah,
actually.
let me just head on out there real quick.
All right. Yeah, it's always great if I can be brought right to the site so I can see firsthand, pictures worth 1,000 words, of course. So it's always great to be able to do this interactively. Looks like you've got blue skies with a bit of cloud wherever you are. Okay, I'm getting a bit of a picture of things. Yeah. Okay, so you showed me the interior. What's going on in there for you?
Let's see if I can change the camera around. I don't know how to do that on here.
Okay. Yeah, oftentimes it'll be the lower right-hand corner where they have that reversing arrow to flip to the front-facing camera.
Huh. Yeah, I'm not finding it. Okay, well, there's just little things in there. Let's see if that, it's not focusing very well, huh?
Oh, you can describe them. Are they white? Are they what color are
They're
they?
tan color.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it, but there it goes. Yeah, it's just not focusing very well. So they're growing on top of the
Oh, okay. I can see that. So those are
in
I'm
through the sides and the holes.
uh-huh. Yeah. So that's generally if you're getting mushrooms or fungal activity, that's a sign you've got plenty of moisture and actually a good source of carbon that's driving formation of mushrooms and mycelia. And that's actually a healthy sign for the soil. So what you can do though is break that up and distribute it through the bedding when it arises if you want. But also just to be sure, you can grab a handful of the compost and give it a squeeze and just seeps a bit of water between your fingers. That's perfect moisture level. If it actually is dripping wet, then you want to add a bit more carbon to dry it out.
The worms seem to be happy though, so I think that's a good sign too.
That's the most important thing. And they actually, if you're going to err on one side of dry or wet, it's better to err on the side of wet because they can tolerate nice moist conditions up to 80% moisture. 60% is the optimal, but I've seen them do pretty well in fairly wet conditions. So
and it's pretty dry here outside, so I tend to
where
keep
are you located?
In Phoenix.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's very dry. I know it well. Yeah, I'm just actually going to come out there on the 20th of November to visit my mom, who's in an aged care facility there. So
I'm sorry.
I'll have a chance to check it out. So you tend to have to water a fair amount. I imagine your yard and stuff.
Right. I'm not watering the yard right now because the grass is going dormant.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You've had a bit of rain out there, though. It seems like
recently, yes.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, it sounds like you're in good shape. Just keep doing what you're doing. And do you have any further questions about your setup or everything good?
No, I think I'm okay now. I just noticed that today. I was calling to see what other people had as far as questions.
Yeah, you'll tend to find it seasonal. So I noticed that they tend to pop up mostly as it tends to cool down as you move into fall or winter. You'll start to get more mushroom activity. And so the next stage of that is figuring out a way to start growing ones that are edible.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I was looking at. All right. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, so anybody else there has joined us live have further questions? You can just unmute yourselves and ask away. Otherwise, the next question I'll tackle is someone was asking about their system being almost full and wondering about whether they should empty it before winter or wait. And my answer to that is it really depends on if you have plants that are still actively growing as you move into winter. So it can be nice to actually harvest some of the compost if you have house plants, for instance. You can top dress in the containers where you have the house plants, and that'll provide a nice benefit for those plants. But otherwise, if most of what you're growing is outdoors, then it's fine to actually leave the sub pod full over winter. And in fact, the more full it is, the more that buffers the worms from the surrounding environment. And then the final thing is whether you're planning to feed or not over winter. So in places where it's super cold and not enjoyable to go out in the snow and add your food scraps, I've been recommending to people that they just get a small plastic bin, fairly shallow but fairly wide, so there's a lot of surface area, and move that into a space inside where it's not going to drop below. So in Fahrenheit, not drop below, say 40 degrees, more or less. Then you can keep feeding your food scraps to the worms all winter, and then in spring you can then move them back out to the sub pods. I find that much easier than thinking about moving the whole sub pod. You can just use the aerator if you've got one to pull the bedding and worms into a bucket, and then move that into a bin, and then just keep feeding your worms over winter. If you're in a milder climate, where it's not a hassle to take your food scraps and go outside, then you can be just looking for solutions that add a bit of insulation to the garden bed. So a cold frame on top of the bed traps some of that still air inside and will warm it up. And if it's sunny, the air will actually heat up inside as the sun shines through the cold frame, and that'll warm up the worms a bit. Or if you have a power source close to it, another good way is to get one of those seed germination mats and lay that just under the worm blanket, and that provides a bit of a constant source of heat the worms can travel up to and keep being active, and then you just pull that back when you're feeding the worms. So and then the final thing is, I've been advising people, if that area is open to the night sky, to put a bit of insulation on the lid so that you can prevent heat losses through the top of the container. Yeah, so those are basic things to keep in mind. Hi, Leanne.
Hey, yeah, I think that was my question that I wrote in. So I'm in Seattle. The weather
Okay.
is definitely dipping down, and I have the big one. I have the double pod,
Okay.
and I have
Perfect.
seed mats on both.
Oh, okay.
And they're doing great. I have a layer of insulation that I built with a cold frame on top.
Fantastic.
And then a metal roof on top of that.
Oh, great.
I was just checking on them. Yeah, they seem to be super happy. They're really eating a lot. So, and there's a lot of them. So I've stopped feeding one side, and they've all pretty much moved over, except for maybe 2 people. They're still hanging out in that other spot. I don't know why.
You'll often have a few holdouts that'll hang around for whatever reason. So you might have to pick them out as you're separating out the compost, but that's great. It's working as it should. Sounds wonderful.
So you don't think I was going to harvest like next week, just that one area, right? That one pod that, but definitely things are going dormant. I was just going to throw it in with maybe my stuff I have as bulbs now.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine to do. You could top dress around the bulbs, or if you have mulch on that soil, I would lift the mulch up and put it just under that.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's so microbially rich that you want to protect it from direct sunlight if you can. So you'll get more benefit from it if you can actually put a mulch layer on top of it, and that'll allow it to start to colonize and condition the soil in your garden from all the microbes that are in the compost.
I use straw. That's probably okay, right?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. Ideal.
Right. Thanks for
sounds
addressing
great.
that. Yeah, my first
should.
harvest, so I'm excited.
Oh yeah, that'll be good for the bulbs. Well, you'll have to see if you're getting more productivity out of the bulbs this way.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I grow a lot of tulips, so we'll see. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Well, if you have a like a general sense of how long the cut flowers tend to last, if you cut them and bring them indoors, see if they might actually last a bit longer, because as you're providing all the micronutrients and better conditions, they might actually have more staying power.
That would be awesome.
Well, that sort of leads in. Oh, sorry to interrupt you.
No, thank you very much.
Sure.
That leads to my question, another question I had. I'm gonna plan on using the compost for some flowering plants, and I was wondering how I could increase the phosphorus content. And I was looking at maybe bone meal.
Yes. Yeah, that's a fine choice. Just make sure it's well pulverized. You can use rock phosphate, but if you're doing small amounts like that, I tend to favor the bone meal because it's a more of a sustainable choice. The rock phosphate is kind of a dig it up and it's gone proposition. So I think that's going to be fine.
And how much? I mean,
Oh, so do you have a simple soil test kit or any way of evaluating what the condition of your soil is now?
yes, I do. Okay.
So generally my philosophy on adding amendments like especially things like phosphorus is to get an idea of what you've got in there initially. And also if your soil tends to be a high clay soil, then clay has the property of binding up the phosphate. And so you could be in a situation where the available phosphate's lower than the actual recoverable amount from doing a classic soil test. So in those conditions, you want to break up the clay a bit.
Right. Yeah, I might use like cocoa
Yeah.
and perlite and vermiculite, like you talked about earlier, and just
Perfect.
make my own soil.
You know,
compost.
I've done that, and I have to say, so my example, I'm going to write an article about this, but I did a basically it's 50% coco coir, 20% perlite, 20% vermiculite, and 10% worm casting compost.
Mhm.
And it's the ideal soil mix in terms of the loft. So plants root very well because the castings have a bit of a hormonal kind of stimulation for root development. And then it's such an easy medium for roots to travel through that you get great value for rooting crops. So I'm growing ginger here in the subtropics, and I got about 50 pounds of ginger in a three basically 3 feet by 3 foot bed.
Oh
So
wow!
it was I was astonished at how well it did. So I think I highly recommend those defined mixes. And the cool thing is the coconut coir and the vermiculite and perlite are fairly sustainable materials. They're fairly abundant, and so I can use those in good conscience. And the coco coir is a great replacement for peat moss, which I wouldn't recommend anymore. And actually, the coconut coir has benefits over the peat moss in that it's entirely pH neutral, whereas the perlite, the peat moss tends to be a bit on the acidic side, which may not be great for some of what you're growing.
Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Yeah, good luck with that, and always if you have more questions about adding amendments, let me know and I can give you more specific advice. One thing I will say about phosphate that's pretty interesting is if you do happen to have a clay soil condition, if you add small amounts of crushed charcoal to the soil, and I say small amounts because it has a very active binding surface, so you only want to add small amounts, or you want to load nutrients on it first. It'll tend to interact with the clay in such a way that actually releases some of that phosphate. So there are people here in Australia who have the high clay soils that actually watch their phosphorus levels rise year on year, just releasing the bound up phosphorus from the action of the biochar, the charcoal.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, obviously you want to get like organic or.
Yeah, so I make my own here, and it's got a lot of great properties. When you start to read about biochar, it's a great way to sequester carbon in the soil. And as long as you so what I do, my favorite method is actually just putting a bit in with worm food. So I'll add my food scraps and a bit of crushed charcoal, and then you're actually loading that charcoal with nutrients from the food scraps, and the microbes are colonizing it because they've got habitat in all the surface area of that charcoal. And then you just add that, and you're adding it all at once. So it's like a super compost.
Wow, that's neat. I'll have to research that now.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, have a look. I have a couple articles about it on the Grow Hub too. It goes into more detail. So I think it's been great. I tend to see fruit development on my fruit trees happening a year or two earlier because the conditions are so ideal for the soil from it.
Yeah, they're getting all the nutrients and all that.
They're getting all
air
the
and-
nutrients, and then with a richer microbial environment, there's more of a free exchange of nutrients as needed, so that communication between the roots and the microbes is facilitated by the biochar being there.
Sure. Symbiotic relationship.
Exactly. Yeah, feeding the sugars from the plants, and then the minerals from the soil microbes. It's a great win-win situation.
All right.
Okay, so if there are no further questions, it looks like we're coming up on our half hour, but otherwise, have a great week and happy composting and growing. And any questions that occur, you can always type them into the Grow Hub site for asking questions. But yeah, we're here to support you guys. Have a great week.
Thanks so
See you
much.
soon.
You too.
You're welcome. Bye.